We're all very familiar with quest fodder by now, NPCs, monsters, or animals we kill to fulfill the quest objectives by the sheer act of slaying them, or by looting something off them from basic items like necklaces, all the way up to the grisly retrieval of an entire head. Seriously, do you know how gross it is to actually detach a head if you aren't using the proper tools? If you have a big sword or axe, you can get away with one clean slice on a regular-sized human neck, but alone forbid you have smaller weapons and/or a bigger neck to cut through with all its constituent sinew, tendons, and vertebrae. At least you can just slice an ear off, but geez. A bit of a gruesome start, I know. It's appropriate, however, considering what we're getting into. As I've gotten older, my perception of things has evolved and deepened, leading to a number of questions that I don't like the answers to. See, games can make it startlingly easy to just not think about what you're doing unless directly prompted, especially if the action is framed in such a way to make you cavalier about it. It's over the top, it's absurdist, over-exaggerated, so it's not to be taken too seriously. It's not that deep, bro. Except if it does nothing more than that, if a quest just has you going through the motions of the action without any kind of actual pushback or criticism, what is being satirized exactly? What are you meant to find funny about this? If you made the unfortunate decision to have a Twitter account, you may have seen a discussion bubble up a little while back about a particular quest in the Dragonflight Alpha. Spoilers for what appears to be a side quest that isn't attached to the main story, but it involves a rabidly bloodthirsty and hateful Kirin Tor mage acting like the CIA in South American countries by having you destabilize the governing body of a local Gnoll clan who are just chilling. They're just there, minding their own business. He explicitly has you target anyone who looks intelligent, ambitious, or with enough organizational skills to become a leader. The Gnolls even die saying "our land" when you kill them. I'm not seeing the funny here. Because yes, it's over the top, but you don't stop him. You don't help the Gnolls, you don't do anything but just do what he says because LOL quest give me gold. Meanwhile, in posting this quest and being critical of it, the OP got a cavalcade of people rushing to defend it and argue that it's okay to do some unprovoked slaughter on an unrelated group of Gnolls isolated on an island no one has been to in 10,000 years, because humans had a war with Gnolls in the Eastern Kingdoms 100 years ago, so these Gnolls deserve it actually, and I just don't know what to say to that. Because it's completely unhinged, but not exactly surprising when WoW's story doesn't ask you to question it. There's very little attempt to examine or look inwards and ask,
are we the baddies?
Unless, of course, it's in the most heavy-handed, tone-deaf way possible, and yes, I'm still mad about what they did to Sylvanas, Saurfang, Teldrassil, and the Horde as a whole. They already went through this in Mist of Pandaria. Why would you do it again and try to lie to our faces that it won't be Garrosh 2 Undead Boogaloo when it literally was that? Not the point of this video. This is a common theme in Warcraft and a lot of fantasy settings, to be honest, but Warcraft is the one I know best, so it's where we are. Let's start with Gnolls. If you enjoyed this video, please don't forget to like and subscribe and drop a comment telling me your favorite piece of lore. Depicted as filthy, stupid, slavering beastmen, Gnolls are some of the most quintessential quest fodder for starting humans. They're big, dumb, horrible monsters who make tents out of human skin, so obviously mass extermination is the way to go. Obviously. People brought up the Gnoll Wars as justification for that CIA quest, but here's the thing, the Gnolls were here first. That war happened because humans turned up in the region, founded Stormwind, and started to expand their territory right into Gnoll-occupied lands. So the Gnolls responded by raiding their caravans and pushing back against that expansion. Eventually, one particularly intelligent and strategically minded Gnoll called Packlord Garfang organized the rest of the packs into a unified fighting force so overwhelming that the humans were pushed back to the walls of Stormwind. This war only ended when Garfang was slain, sending his forces into chaotic infighting for leadership and allowing the humans to, quote-unquote, annihilate the vast majority of their forces and permanently break their capability to unify. So now, the people who were there first are pushed to the edges of existence, constantly having uppity adventurers wander into their camps to give them another kicking for having the temerity to attack the people who took their lands. But they are still depicted largely as just big stupid savages who will eat you, so it's fine. They're not really people. Just go to their camps where they live with the rest of their pack mates and presumably cubs and kill them all. It is a choice by the writers to portray it this way. Murlocs have culture. They build shelters, they help each other when they're threatened, they adorn themselves with pretty ornaments to attract a mate, they have nature-based religious beliefs, they have a language so hard to decipher that it obscured their true intelligence, they pass down their history orally, and they're quite possibly one of the oldest races on Azeroth. And they're casually slaughtered to make soup out of their fins. Their scales are torn off to make armor, slime is harvested from their bodies to lure and catch fish, their babies are kept as pets used to fight other animals, you can sometimes fish up a Murloc leash, and even beat up and abduct an adult Murloc to keep a lonely dude company, and their eyes can even be used as a magical focus. They get disrespected by pretty much everything and everyone else on Azeroth, so it only feels fair that they wake up and choose violence every day. But it sure would be nice to have a more nuanced take on them that doesn't involve a PETA parody imposing himself on them. While we're near the ocean, however. No, they're unfortunately not just big lobster monsters. Makrura speak Nurglish, same as the Murlocs. They're capable of shamanistic magic, and pretty much everyone that has meat in their diet can and will hunt them for dinner. While yes, the RPG is considered non-canon, it's honestly a shame that at least some of what's in there wasn't transferred to the game, because there are genuinely neat bits of additional lore in there. As an example, the Makrura have a capital city near the Maelstrom called Makaru, and they are dire enemies of the nearby Naga. Their society is matriarchal, they live in coral-like buildings, and oh my god! I'm of two minds, because Naga on the whole are meant to be a heartless imperialistic empire, so this tracks, but also, Jesus Christ. Let's get back on land. I am extremely relieved and encouraged by the approach Dragonflight is taking with Centaur. Instead of nonsensically denying that there's any kind of real-life racial influence on the design, the Dragonel Centaur are sticking to the Mongolian influence without making it a ghoulish and offensive caricature. Seriously, it is a very good thing they are moving away from this. And it's one thing to be mortal enemies with another people who have thoughts, feelings, and cultures of their own, but it's quite another to make a habit of skinning and tanning them to use as rugs. Like, imagine this same decoration, but it's a human, or an orc. That would be pretty messed up, right? Though I am very aware that there is a contingent of the player base that starts salivating at any opportunity for mindless brutality, and they wouldn't see a problem with that, but we shouldn't be taking their interests into account. If they want horrific acts of violence for the sake of it, they can go read Crossed. While mainland Centaur will still be there as is, we now have a major group of them who are friendly and aren't just depicted as filthy warmongers with a terrible Fu Manchu design. It's more about ideology instead of something inherent to them as a race, which is really the crux about a lot of these Quest Fodder Races, leading us to... Yes, Mancrick's dead wife is very sad. Big tragic, much tears. But similar to Gnolls and humans, the land settled by orcs was home to the Quilboar first. And they get hunted, murdered in their own homes, tortured, and generally disrespected. Did they fight with the Tauren who lived there too? Yes, but they weren't pushed back into their warrens and killed en masse like they are now until the Horde arrived. Speaking of those warrens, do you remember that the thorns you often see around Quilboar settlements are the result of their progenitor demigod's blood falling in that area 10,000 years ago? Agamagan fought against the Legion during the War of the Ancients, and when he was slain, his blood caused these massive thorny vines to sprout. So these areas are sacred ground to the Quilboar, most of all the Razorfen, as it contains the thickest concentration of these vines. We learn their aggression throughout the Barrens is largely driven by a corrupt leader, Charlga Razorflank, who used the promise of resurrecting their demigod to drive the tribes into action, but after slaughtering our way through the Fen and killing her, nothing really changes going forward in the story. Quilboar on Exile's Reach are hostile because they're serving the Ogres, and the Quilboar in Stormsong Valley were originally going to be the ones who attacked and slaughtered the people of Brennadam, before Blizzard decided the totally honorable and morally grey horde of BFA had to do it because Teldrassil just wasn't enough. They're squad wiped like literal rats when they're just little guys who like to dig and wear candles on their heads. But you know, they breed like rabbits and they're not very intelligent despite clearly having some form of industrial skills to make clothing, bags, tools for digging, and the damn candles on their heads, implying they're capable of treating animal skin, weaving cloth, shaping wood, smelting metal, and shaping it as needed. They're also capable of magic, but as with every other sign of intellect in kobolds, it's played down as just some primitive earth magic, plus singular mastery of a nasty fireball and little else. Like, they could have just been some troublesome badger creatures. They didn't need to be little rat men who wear candles on their heads and are fully capable of speech. Because that's one of the big ones, right? When we're gauging intelligence in animals, are they capable of complex communication? Can they hold a conversation in one form or another? You can make certain groups of kobolds aggressive and resource hoardy like magpies, make it so their knowledge of metallurgy and working with precious gems is on par with the dwarves since they spend all their time underground and digging, make it so certain kobold clans believe the bounties of the earth are theirs by divine right through their belief that they descended from a burrowing wild god, so they attack mines from within and disrupt supply lines. Do more than just writing off an entire species capable of speech, tool use, and industrial effort as inherently pathetic and stupid and primitive, and that's why it's okay to kill them like vermin. It's boring and lazy and honestly kind of sus when you just keep doing it. So Troggs came about because the Titans were trying to make Earth and royally messed it up, and instead of hitting delete, they just put the early draft into stasis because they couldn't stand to kill them, presumably intended to stay there until the end of time, so like, why even do that instead of just killing them? Putting them on hold forever is functionally the same. This is another case where it could be that deep. You could have had the Troggs be resentful of dwarves for being the golden children, as it were, when they were locked away from the world because the Titans considered them failures who didn't deserve to forge their own path. But instead they're just an amalgamation of troglodyte and misinformed Neanderthal concepts that we can kill with impunity. Great. Oh boy, this one really bothers me. It's the eggs. There are multiple instances where we destroy harpy eggs, and on occasion a small harpy will pop out of those destroyed eggs that we then proceed to kill. Congratulations, you just murdered a child, but because it's a harpy, it's okay to spawn wipe a newborn, despite the fact that harpies are actually acknowledged as very clever, are capable of speech, powerful magic, adorn themselves according to rank and flock membership, and yet they were driven mad with grief and despair when their progenitor wild god Eviana was killed during the War of the Ancients, and their sacred home tree Gahania was destroyed by virtue of its deep ties to Eviana herself. So they're deeply traumatized, but turn evil because of it, and go on to be repeatedly described as vile winged women who live in squalid nests and are rumored to kidnap and forcibly breed with male victims to keep their numbers up. I'm not saying the way harpies are written in WoW exposes some ugly feelings the devs might have about women, but I'm not saying that either. Case in point, they only get more beautiful with age. Blizzard, turn on location. I just want to talk with whoever wrote this description for an underage female of a sentient species you can have as a pet. Until BFA, the only playable and therefore good trolls were the Darkspear. For every other kind of troll, including the Zandalari, it was almost always on site. Trolls as a species are one of the original ancient peoples native to Azeroth, and they're inarguably coded as various flavors of African or Latin cultures, which makes it kind of yikes when in almost every case outside the Darkspear and now the Zandalari, trolls are written as evil, cruel, brutal savages with their strange voodoo magic and Jamaican accents. It's a terrible meme now to have a troll raid or dungeon in every expansion where we butcher our way through a troll city and kill all their warriors, leadership, and often their gods too because they were doing something nefarious or because we just didn't like them being nearby. Which isn't as questionable done once or twice. Maybe that particular group was just really into a blood god apocalypse. Fine, whatever. It's far more questionable when you do it with basically all of them, except the one group of good ones until we get the Zandalari, and make a worrying habit of casually killing off their Loa. Few got this treatment worse than the Amani, constantly framed as the bad guys and the aggressors when they are categorically in the right. What became Quel'Thalas was Troll land originally. The city of Silvermoon was built on sacred ruins, and in the Troll Wars, the Amani suffered a defeat so destructive that their once mighty empire would never recover. And no, before any weirdos who salivate at the chance to murder some elves jump in the comments, what the High Elves did doesn't mean the genocide they suffered by Arthas was good actually, or that he should have finished wiping them out. No one deserves that. Not the Amani, and not the elves. What should have happened in the story for Eversong and the Ghostlands is the Blood Elves beginning the long, difficult, but necessary journey of making amends with the Amani. Both of their people are at risk if the remaining scourge isn't dealt with in the Ghostlands, and the Alliance isn't going to see either of them as friend just because they're at each other's throats. But Morgan, you cry, that would never happen! Sure, if you lack the range to write it. But with enough work, you can build nearly any story to previously unimaginable endings. And while I said that the Amani have been screwed over the worst, the Frost Trolls around Dunmorrow are a close second because... Come here. Come over here. Let me show you something. This is Cold Ridge Valley, where dwarf players start. As you know, dwarves are stout folk, most of the races are taller than them. Milling around the valley are frost trolls, many of them called whelps, and they're about the same size, if not slightly taller than you as a dwarf. Until you stand next to this soothsayer, and realize that the whelps aren't that size because they're low level or stunted, it's because they're children, and you've been killing them. The Furbolg were allies to the Night Elves and Tauren for thousands of years, but after the Burning Legion invaded in Warcraft 3, all of them went mad, which, similar to the Harpies, sounds like they were traumatized by horrible demons destroying everything around them, but okay. We have a handful of tribes that are rarely outright friendly, but are at least tolerant of outsiders, but for the most part, Furbolg are just angry bearmen who attack whatever comes near, actively going out of their way to murder travelers, attack settlements, and fall deeper into either corruption or, quote, rage. Even when those Furbolg try to reach out for help, the attempt is sabotaged, like the Blackmaw in Ajara attempting to negotiate with the Night Elves so they can help stop the goblins from pushing them out of their home. Instead of negotiating a deal with the Furbolg, the goblins make them think the Night Elves deceived them and carry on killing and pushing the Furbolgs out. I'm not saying that the story beat of displacing and killing groups of people is bad in and of itself. A story can have all kinds of dark, messy, unjust subject matter and still be a good story, but it's how these things are framed. Are we encouraged to question it? Are we encouraged to see this as an immoral, wasteful, or destructive course of action? I mean, during that quest chain, you're sent to murder diplomats and steal their clothes. I really shouldn't have to tell anyone that killing non-combatants is bad, actually. But we're really veering off into the whole, it's called Warcraft topic, and that's something for a whole other video. I just want more depth, nuance, and in the case of the corrupted or otherwise traumatized people, kindness to be employed when using these groups in quests and zone story. They shouldn't just be inherently like that, and if they're like that because of corruption, there should be more effort from their former allies or sympathetic observers to help them heal. Speaking of sympathetic observers, magically engineered soldiers brutally flesh-shaped from animals to be shock troops of a cruel empire are about as close as Blizzard got to an inoffensive quest fodder species. The reason the Saurok are the way they are is very straightforward and understandable. However, the potential was here for the Saurok to grow beyond the cruel machinations of the people who so brutally ripped them into existence, desperately trying to fill a growing void inside them with more treasure and spoils, but finding what they were made for just doesn't work anymore. And pockets of them begin to figure out what it is that they want, if there's more to being alive than killing and stealing. Perhaps a handful of Pandaren try to help them, giving them just enough guidance to forge a stable path away from the single-minded weapons the Mogu wanted them to be. We absolutely could have kept hostile Saurok causing havoc. Not all of them have to change, and some would see nothing wrong with their existence, but we could have had more, something with more meat to it, more depth, which is honestly a problem across the board when it comes to WoW's world building. Is there a lot of lore? Yes, absolutely. But try actually figuring out the finer details of, say, governments. What about the Azerothian calendar? The names of the days in the week? What the orcs called their native planet? Because, remember, Draenor is what the Draenei called it. There's so much missing in the vast amount of lore that it leaves the world feeling shallow for all its breadth. but we're almost done, so let's keep it moving. So about that quest in Dragonblight where the Tuskarr have you benevolently abduct a bunch of Wolvar pups, just in case the Tuskarr kill too many of the adults that it wipes out the Snowfall tribe. Now, it's not directly stated what exactly the Tuskarr plan to do with these pups in the meantime, but the implications are that they'll be kept until the fighting with the Snowfall calms down, which would mean raising the pups away from their kin and culture. I really shouldn't need to explain why that's messed up, but let's just say that taking people away from their home and raising them without their history, culture, and language has been done multiple times in the real world, and it's always a destructive thing that causes immeasurable generational damage and pain. So framing the Tuskarr as doing a compassionate thing with the Wolvar, and just so happening to depict the Wolvar as horrible little wolverine people in order to justify it, I think the scientific term for this is a bit fucking yikes. The Yaungol are fleeing their territory because of Shah fuckery and the Mantids, but there's no communication, no attempt to request passage into Kunlai. We're just going to write them off as unilaterally savage invaders who must be killed en masse. Another case of it could be that deep if you tried, instead of just saying they're all inherently like that. There's something very messed up about going from one quest where a dragon is friend-shaped and is treated like a person with thoughts and feelings like any human or orc, and then do another quest where someone has you go and murder a dragon broodmother because they're worried her spawning too many will become a danger to their village like she's some dangerous wild animal. Not to mention the constant making of armor out of dragon parts, mounting their heads like trophies, being able to skin them, including the whelps who are, as the term whelp might imply, very young or otherwise child dragons. The narrative has a very inconsistent relationship with the dragons, but a horrifically consistent relationship with forced dragon breeding, which is a subject for another video, but worth mentioning here because I can't think of another sentient thinking feeling species that the writers have so regularly subjected to this kind of trauma. I'm curious if dragonflight will affect the perception of dragons in-universe and questlines going forward, but I retain the right to be suspicious considering Blizzard's track record. Dishonorable mentions go to... I almost forgot about them, but while I don't have much in the way of concrete thoughts, I've never particularly been a fan of ogres depicted as these largely oafish, cruel, fat idiots, save for a few clever spellcasters who are still cruel. Warcraft 3 set itself apart from other fantasy settings by flipping the script about orcs and saying, no, actually, they're not just inherently like this, it was demon blood and warlocks. Warcraft is at its best when it flips the traditional expectation of these fantasy races, so most ogres being written as these big stupid bullies is just disappointing and boring. I already went over this a couple of times in my Warcraft Reimagined series, but the Lost Ones being a direct result of what happened during the Draenei genocide, mutating and devolving because of some demonic biological weapon unleashed on Shatrath, they're victims of an unimaginable trauma, but almost all of them are written off as cruel, violent, primitive, and unsalvageable monsters. At least the Broken have noticeable presence in Draenei society, and we can befriend the Kurenai, but it could be better. I'm just very disappointed that the only friendly Viking giants we can get are the ones serving Odin, when Odin himself is an arrogant trashbag who is responsible for Helya being the way she is because he straight up forced her to be the first Valkyr against her will, without her consent. I hate this. And with that, we are done with this list. I'm sure I've missed some, so please let me know down in the comments. Again, I'm not saying that having quest fodder makes the game morally bad, or that anyone is a bad person for enjoying the game. Hell, I enjoy the game, or I wouldn't be spending so much energy on making videos about it. Rather foolishly, I believe that Warcraft can be better than it is, even if I also believe that would require significant internal changes to both team structure and narrative attitude. I know some of you are sick of hearing WoW compared to Final Fantasy XIV, but it's worth noting that it started out with tribes of violent and hostile beastmen who were depicted in a wholly negative light most of the time. The difference is that the narrative eventually turned to depict them as what they actually were, fully fledged people with thoughts, feelings, and dreams, and a desire to not be pushed out of their homes. I genuinely think Warcraft would benefit from taking a similar path regarding the various quest fodder races in the game, opening up different narrative possibilities down the line. Regardless, I hope you enjoyed this video because it's something that's been at the back of my thoughts for a long while now. Special shoutouts to my supporters on Patreon who are all very handsome people, and especially to my newest patrons, Lissa and Greg. I'm currently in the process of moving and experiencing the onset of some seasonal depression, so I really needed some breathing room on the Blade's Edge video, but it is being worked on, so that should be the next video I put out. Until then, don't forget to eat, hydrate, take your meds, be kind to yourselves, and I will see you next time.